War Horde proves to be best. Is it the rise of the tide, or was it just a slow weekend? Welcome back to Wall Tactics. We're here to talk about War Horde winning a GT. So right after the nerf back comes and everybody's ready to jump ship, good old index detachment comes back in and gets us a win. So let's get stuck in, lads. We have good notes from Jeff Chu himself, as he was able to hit me up and send me 21 pages of Drive documents. And since you're here, you don't have to read all of it. We can just break it down. So, with that being said, let's start with the stats and the facts because, like we said, it's a slow weekend. Shout out to everybody who's here right now. So we had more DACA. I was looking around. It was an event in France. It was 25 players. The guy did go 4-1, but I was not able to find that event. I looked far and wide. Couldn't see what was going on with that list or anything. Sorry, but if I find it, I show it to you guys maybe next week. Then we have Green Tide. We are going to cover that today. That is our good old boy, Noah Bedham. He's pretty much the tip of the spear for Green Tide, not only in my Discord or our Discord, but he's also all over just Discord and social media itself, really just teaching Ork players how to understand the basics, fundamentals of Green Tide. So shout out to him because he still wins 5-1 this weekend. We'll look at that. And then we have Taktikal Brigade, just somebody was playing it. And then War Horde just really coming through the gates with the most players and the most wins at a 45% win rate. But we had two X and O or X and 1 or X and 1 O placings and then one event win. So with that being said, let's give a shout out to today's sponsor, the Baron of Dice, as they allow us to do our paint competition, high quality dice. Check them out in the description for 5% off because nobody likes taxes. And shout out to Forge Fire Gaming for their nice acrylic bases where they're slotted. That way you can effectively take the terrain off, get nice precise measurements for competitive play and practice. So shout out to them and their high quality terrain. And we move on to Jeff Chu's War Horde list. So Wet Coast GT. It was the biggest event this Easter weekend, and Jeff Jew ended up winning it. Kind of shook up the 40K community slightly. When everything was looking doom and gloom for Ork players, and just how everybody was feeling about that, which I totally understand, right, guys? I'm an actual Ork player, so I know that more than anyone else probably, where I say I don't really like being defaulted back to our index hammer. That being said, it's such a great detachment, and it was actually something that Jeff consciously, willingly took and was taken into consideration. So let me just tell you some of the thoughts, his overall meta analysis, and then we'll actually go into his list. So he was looking at this event in Canada. Shout out to the Canadian Gits. He said they were very friendly and he had a great time there. And the person running the event did a great job. We're going to actually have some pictures that I'm going to show you of each round, at least the deployment that he sent. That way you can actually see the event terrain in real time too, because there was some nice little features to it that were different. But he was thinking there's going to be at the top of this tables, there are going to be custode players, Space Marines everywhere. Probably some Yannari gets sprinkled in, and then Astra Militarum, as he was very familiar with the Astra Militarum player who ended up getting second place at this event because it was one of his friends. So that being said, he looked at that and he goes, well, I think for the most part, even though I'm aware that custodians at their top potential and played to the most effectiveness can propose a big issue for Orks and War Horde in some ways, at the same time, he had the tools and he felt like he could kind of outplay custodes because as soon as they start to take more damage than they're expecting or not get the offensive output that they're relying on, then they kind of tend to fall apart and lose momentum. So other than that, he's very familiar with Space Marines because he plays them. Therefore, he felt like he can kind of pull that off on those matchups too a little bit. He said the strengths of this, because he was really considering Taktikal Brigade as he's been playing it before and doing well with it as well, or the War Horde. So the reason he ended up going with War Horde to an extent and Orks themselves is, one, he likes having a lot of OC in battle line. He thinks that really gives you an advantage and what the meta really comes to bring and what were the strong matchups in this meta. It's like his favorite version of OC bodies is he's really big fan of Orks. He also thinks they have a high skill ceiling, and War Horde itself giving the fight on death, trading potential, and then just really throttling, spiking on damage, having come with a default or known game plan. But in this way, it was an effective game plan. It's really implementing your will. In Tactical Brigade, it is about being a cunning git sometimes, and you're taking advantage of your assets, your stratagems, your redeployments. But in that case, you could almost not be as so influential on the battlefield and the tempo like War Horde, where he was like, I know what I'm doing. I have a set game plan, not so much on what my opponent wants to do necessarily every game. Of course, you consider their strengths, but you're still imposing your will as that's what your game plan is. And I think that is a strength also because time clock management, which is a factor. I mean, even when people are familiar and seasoned players, they're really sometimes they're going just for damage and the simplicity of the play, not because they can't manage something else. It's because when you're going over 6 rounds, you can consistently manage it, and that's really what he was saying was a determining factor, as well as Yanari was kind of an issue that he think he had to kind of consider going into the top tables, and he doesn't really like the fact that you have to bring so much characters, like I talk about with Tactical Brigade. They get really heavy. You get really easy into 7-8 characters of Tactical Brigade, and it takes away from your scoring potential, mission play, and so in that case, between the trading, the effective damage, and kind of the overall game plan simplicity, he said War Horde was where he really wanted to shine and ended up investing in that, and it did matter. Another thing here when we talk about his list is some other things that he was considering, but let's look at his list real quick. So Gazgul Thraka, he had a lot to say about that, but let's talk about everything else real quick as well. 2 pain boys, 2 war bosses, 2 enhancements. This was Follow Me Lads and Cunning But Brutal. Now, he absolutely loved Follow Me Lads and Cunning But Brutal. They were very important, as that 20-man unit ends up surviving longer than it should, regenning some boys. The fact that it can fall back and continue to maintain momentum, flip the enemy's home objective, is a big problem after the wall. Follow Me Lads makes it so that unit really gets across the battlefield so much faster, especially if you end up losing somebody a little early, and then you regen, get an extra 2-3 inches. He said it was very cool and important to him. So battle line, 220-man unit of boys, 2 trucks, and then 2 battle wagons. Of course, he had the same profiles on both. He had RK, staff roller, lava cannon, and then of course the 4 big shooters on both those wagons. Then he had 2 SWAT teams. These are 2 5-man units of flash kits, and then 2 tank buzzers without the shock attack guns. 2 minimum size units of Gretchen, 1 Storm Boy, and then some Mega Knobs. Now, there's a lot to say here. Quite elite, low activations, low unit count. He felt it, he noted it, and that did come into play as for other choices he chose not to make and that he did make. So to start off with, tank busters without the shock attack gun. All of us gets, including Jeff himself, who has been playing any variation of DACA Orks, understands that for the most part, the shock attack gun is the most vital asset of the combo of tank buster and shock attack gun, as he's what really brings sometimes more than half the damage himself. And so not bringing him totally diminishes its reliability, but the enemy doesn't always necessarily know that and can't really rely on them not averaging bad damage or low output, right? If they don't respect the tank bus's potential and they put their lancers in dumb line of sight or maybe a transport, they can't really just play and impose their will on you the same way they would if you absolutely had no anti-tank and DACA potential. So he said really just the influence psychologically and with game plans and resource allocation on the battlefield, staging positionings, it affected all of that. So what it actually did on the battlefield was very much secondarily throughout almost the whole event there, but it didn't matter because the enemy can't rely on that. It doesn't mean the enemy's silly for making that choice or not knowing enough of the rules. Sometimes to a degree that can be somewhat of a factor if the enemy is very familiar with Orks or your data sheets and they're not watching WAAAGH Tactics, hopefully. But they will still have to react and respond accordingly to even the potential of these things happening. Therefore, he said that was the determining factor in their utility. Like it wasn't that they were necessarily always putting huge output, but the fact that they could, the enemy had to respect it, so he could continue to impose his will, right? He took away some of the initiation from the enemy, and he was able to continue, which is default plan of initiation and controlling the battlefield. So right there, right off the bat, that was some psychological play as well, just decision making because he's so low on assets. Speaking of being low on assets, we talk about commandos a lot on this channel, but I don't consider them mandatory. what you actually have on your list, what detachment you're playing. Like for a green tide, I almost always bring Mandos. But for my dread mob, almost never do. In this case, he said yes, commandos would be very important. They would be very beneficial if he could fit them on the list, but he simply didn't have the points. He simply didn't have, anything to cut here. You can see there's like no fat on this list at all, and there's nothing wrong with that. I totally agree. But as we go through his path to victory, you're going to see that he did have to dig himself out of some trenches here once in a while. So that's always a factor, right, guys? We can't have every tool for everything. We can't have a perfect list. So sometimes you just got to take your pros and cons and kind of get with it. So good choice and decision making as well in that, and very respectable. Now, of course, I didn't forget about Gaz. Shout out to Anthony, by the way, getting me hooked up with Jeff, and he said thanks a lot to you as well, Anthony. So Gaz, right? He said Gaz is the reason you play War Horde to an extent. He has a love-hate relationship with him, as we all do, as Gaz is competing for the center staging positions where sometimes the battle wagon wants to be, but the battle wagons have the boys and Gaz is in the way. And sometimes you can argue, well, I can keep him close so he can help heroic, but in reality, he's too far back, and that's annoying. But all in all, this is the reason you play. It's actually the bread and butter of the list because it goes with the boys, right? We understand Makari giving the boys the lethal, but lethal 5+, and then Gaz retaining his own 5+ is really what gives you the damage spike and the ability to really offset these armies that typically wouldn't think you have the output from these just 1 AP strength 4 on the wall strength 5 boys. But the volume is king, my gits. Once you understand that, as someone who's been to intermediate or a beginner in Orks, don't think like you're playing a different kind of elite faction where you're thinking, well, the numbers and average say that I can really spike damage with these, very high-end quality shots. Like we would say tank busters would be an example of that. Can't rely on that as an Ork player. Neither did Jeff. You can rely on this. Volume is king. Just more DACA, more punches, more crumping, more dice is always the answer. But of course, you still have to think about time management. But that was the answer in these matchups as we get into it. And I'm totally on board for that. This is what we've been doing since Index Hammer. Not that I'm taking it away from Jeff from being clever, because of course the tank busters was a clever, nice and evolution of this. But having the mobs of boys and Gaz has been just so important in playing War Horde and really effective in so much of the meta. Other than that, he was saying the SWAT teams were cool because the flash kits were absolutely they are absolutely our best skirmish trading piece. 80 points. He ended up saying, hey, I'd shoot some scouts away, charge off to something else, score secondaries, draw enemies out so that they can get fights in. So it was really a big deal that he had them. Now, some people would say, how do we feel about maybe a Big Mech instead of the Pain Boys is something he wanted to bring up. He thinks that at the highest end of players, right? Like we're talking about Brian Sepp, who's arguably the best Ork player currently. He's freaking run it because he understands the fact that the weakness of these mobs of boys that you're going to have to face is being move blocked, right? No infiltration and move blocked. So he goes, well, some people might want to test and figure out if they can make a Big Mac work. I think in War Horde, this is the sleeper detachments to make him work, as giving him follow me, lads, and then here we go, right? When you can actually activate it, of course, you have to get out of the wagon, which can put you in bad positions, which we'll talk about as well. But you can actually stack the speed. And actually on the wall, you're typically putting here we go on Gaz. So in reality, the follow me, lads, is just really what's making you fast, but the Big Mac still taking advantage of that. Or if you decide to fall back and charge, and you can put the Big Mac on, put the enhancement on that for the Big Mac, and that allows you to get out of dodge and continue to run through the enemy screens that were trying to hold you in place. But the Pain Boy durability is such a big deal, he said. Very, very important, and the regeneration can't be overlooked. It's crazy for 80 points how much he really is worth it. For 3 wounds, right? You would think that's what I was trying to point out. He's really just 3 wounds, but he's totally worth it. I would never doubt it, and I would have a very hard time trying to take a Big Mac over a Pain Boy personally, but I respect him in adding that into his notes because I think it was a good point to bring up. So yeah, one thing he wanted to say as well for you Gits before we start talking about his breakdown is he did take into consideration that the lack of unit counts and activations means you're pretty much going to be deployed way before your opponent, which means they're going to kind of counter your deployment. Therefore, he thinks if you're playing this and practicing it, the biggest issue you're going to have is, oops, I lost the wagon too early. I'm out of position. My boys get mopped up a little bit. It takes too much damage. In reality, the core and the fundamental part of this list is on the wall, getting both of these mobs of boys into contact with something and Gaz into contact with something. So it's about wall timing. It's about patience. It's about using your SWAT teams and your other low unit counts units you have, but you have to make them work. Your trucks, your flash kits, even your other unit of Gretchen, which you said on some matchups he would start inside the transport and then disembark. Really deploy the truck right on the line, disembark, and then what we'd call kind of leapfrog, have a different unit jump inside of there. So you can make him some distance and get up the field earlier, because he doesn't have enough assets to really screen all game either. So he really has to decide, hey, some matchups I'm going to have to get up here on the field, and we'll talk about that too. So now it's time to go into the matchups. So right here, we got our boy Jeff Chu at West Coast in Canada. 163 players. So let's go to his path to victory. Now, he did send me some notes, and it was a lot, so I'm going to try not to get lost in them. I was reading them already. But yeah, let's look at his enemies list. So this was a Plague Company, just vehicle spam. He did think that Death Guard was problematic. He looked at it going into this, and it's like, goodness, I can see this being an issue. But we'll talk about how this game actually went after we look at the list. Mortarion, Typhus, some cultists, 2 Poxwalkers, 3 units of Predator Destructors, which of course are actually problematic for one unit of boys. That's what they're for, is for infantry. 2 units of Blones, 2 units of Blight Haulers, which are individuals, 3 Plague Burst Crawlers, and then 1 Carnivore Dog. So let me pull up that picture like I promised you get. Boom. Here's of his deployment as I look at his notes again, just in case I don't miss anything. So this was layout 8. Terraform Stalwart Crucible of Battle, mission O. So as you can see, he did intentionally leave that battle wagon at the bottom of the screen right there. He just said I couldn't really hide everything, and I understood that he was limited on his shots. He'd have to really commit to go get it, and they don't have the best weapons to necessarily pop that wagon in like low activations, right? One, crawler is not going to do anything to it. So he understood he was somewhat safe there, but he did end up going first. That way he was able to really stage up on that terrain piece with that whole wagon and the boys, which was a huge advantage and importance in the tempo. Now, he said that the enemy did end up pushing right into him. He did ask the player, why did you do that? When we talked after they talked it out in the game, he said it's really because the enemy was scared of getting locked in his own deployment, which is fair enough. But when he really decided to move forward with the Predators, the Haulers, the Carnivore, he ended up pretty much taking a wad of the face turn 2 with all 40 boys and Gaz. Now, you can see if you're looking at the picture on screen that Mortarion is centered in the back of the field. He was using him to take advantage of those like ignore modifiers on the Plague Burst Crawlers. But because, he didn't really respect the damage output here, and well, he probably did, but because he was so worried about the tempo here and getting locked in his deployment that he really had to take a chance on the damage, is probably a better way to put it. That he ended up losing too many assets to a degree and controlling the game to a little bit. He said that he thinks Morty could have come up, but in that he really wouldn't have killed him because he thinks it's just too much to kind of invest into killing him. He still thinks the default game plan would have worked, even though he was dying slowly because the Predator Destructors and everything don't have enough output, and he was able to do just enough damage when he did get his go turn going. So that makes sense. Great call on there. This table is deceitfully it works for melee armies because of the staging positions on these big terrain pieces on the side, and I really find that who goes first and second, it's a huge factor on this layout. And then infiltrators feel important when you got them, and then who ended up getting them first, very important on that. So great job there. Let's move. Let me see. I have the code. I think I have the score before I lie. I was about to say move on. 94 to 49 for that one. So then let's move on to his second game. And Anthony's in chat narrating as well. So anything you say, that's what's up. I'll try to read it as I go. So let's look at his. I said, oh, well, actually, I can just leave this up. Actually, why'd I say that? We can look at game 2. Mission A, taking hold, raise banners, tipping point, and it was layout 8 as well. So let me pull it over on my other screen. And then I'll read off to you guys what his the enemies list. Now, this was a Blood Angels list, and he said, sorry, wait. He put it out of order for me, I think. Because he put Blood Angels, but it was really Gene Stealers. Okay, Gene Stealers. So it was his Gene Stealers matchup. I'll read you the list, and then actually he didn't put it out of order. I read something out of order. Sorry. So this was his the guy's name is Stu Angel. So I said Blood Angel, and I started reading his name is Blood Angel. My bad, bro. I made your name a Blood Angel name. So Stu Angel is the player's name. Playing Gene Stealers, and he said he's an excellent player. And what ended up happening here, just to make sure I get to the crux of this, is that they pretty much timed out round 4, and ended up being a very, very close game. I think I have a second picture here. As you can see, we have another picture here while I talk about it. He said he knew it was a really difficult matchup because great players. Stu was a great player, the host of Ascension. And he also knew it was raised banners. He knew that Stu was possibly going to get on his home objective, so he decided turn 1 to let the boys start outside of the battle wagon so they could sticky his home objective early. Because whenever you're playing against G Stealer guys, like I always say, regardless of the intimidation factor as to them having a lot of units and you worrying about dying too early and having the perfect wall, it's about pressure on the Gene Stealers, right? They whenever you look at another Xenos army, other than maybe Necrons, because they're confused army, they don't know what they want to do and they want everything. Most Xenos armies are trying to play a very similar game plan to you. Is I'm going to trade my bodies for points. I'm going to have a lot of units that aren't super effective, but they do just enough, and I know how to use them. And if you are too passive against me, I'm going to get you to commit to me late with not enough assets, and then I'm going to just outlast your output. That's what Gene Stealers want to do because they're regenning units as well. So he didn't say all those. That's what I'm summarizing as from my awareness, but his notes summarize that where he said, I knew that I had to get into him right off the bat. And he said it was kind of a thing he had second guessed by leaving them on his home objective, the sticky, because he said, I'm trying to get up the field with everything and committing to just ripping on them, right? He said it ended up playing out for him. You can actually see on the picture that I have up right now at the bottom left corner of the screen where he has the boys already up and staking it. It ends up playing out. I think it's because that terrain piece right there on this layout means that they could just drive forward and advance, try to stage up there again, and then disembark anyways, and have a good like leapfrogging off spot. So he said they ended up getting low on time here, and that there was a chance that he could have come back. But he could have come back from it. But ultimately, he was saying that Stu was a great player because something that all of us should keep in mind when you're playing against Gene Stealers, they have a strat where if you shoot at their unit and you don't kill it and you do damage to it, that they can just pick that unit back up. And he said Stu was reminding him of that, so he really didn't get to use his tank busters too much, and his flash gets too much that effect. So he said on turn 3, he ended up wawing and picking up everything on the ground, everything that was in the face that he could. And his whole point on this army was, turn 2, what happened here, why he had to waw turn 3 is because Stu did the correct thing and blocked his entire army early in the game, right? So because our friend here, Jeff, didn't end up getting turn 1, sticking was important, but then it meant that the Gene Stealer player was able to take the initiative and try to block him out as effectively as he could. He said he did want to try to charge him, but really the battle wagons are just effective enough in position where he didn't want to get punched up. He ended up staying in his wagons on turn 2 and then used his small units of screen, like I said. And then, on turn 3, as he stated earlier, that the Gene Stealer player dropped into his back line. I think I actually have a picture of that. Hopefully, maybe right there. Yep. If you see on the left side of the screen right now, he said that he ended up dropping on his home deployment. Turn, and I would charge all light for them stealing. So he said he pretty much charged to stop the enemy from getting on his home objective early enough, or pretty early in that case. And then this is where the game starts to run out of time. And it ends up the judge comes over and says, well, the game's over at this point on round 4. And and he said that Jeff was totally fine with it. He was a big gentleman, and he goes, well, the time management thing was an issue, that he think that he made a mistake himself, and he just took the the responsibility of that, and he was a Chad. So shout out to Stu Angel for taking that 68-point win. It was like a 5-point game, so it was a 63-68. So that was anyone's game. And, you know, our boy Jeff wants a rematch to get them teeth knocked so you can get them teeth knocked out again. It was a good game. So he said he'd like to play them again, and it was great fun. And so we move on to game 3. So game 3, we're going into Tyranids Crusher Stampede. This is Mission N, The Ritual, Swift Action, and then Crucible of Battle. This is layout 3 again. Now, you're already thinking, Ritual, Tyranid Monster Mash, I wonder what's going to happen here. Looking at the screen, I'm sure you're starting to figure it out. So we have a Hive Tyrant, unit of Biovores, 2 Exocrine, Maliceptors, Neurogaunts, triple Norn Emissary, 2 units of Ripper Swarms, and then 2 Tyrannophexes. So, very, very straightforward here. So he said he was familiar with this guy as his teammate, and that he knew this guy had a very effective Tyranid list and understanding of how to use Tyranids, but it was the Ritual. And he said the one thing that he didn't like, he felt like he had the matchup in this, but he didn't want to go first. So he wanted the Tyranid pretty much to run up, and then he could just run up and punch him. But it still ended up playing out that way because there's only one objective in the middle, and the Norn emissaries want to get their Feel No Pain, and they want to form an objective, right? So the Tyranid player pretty much just said, I'm going to run up and get up on it, and he called a wall into it. Let's see. He said because he said he ended up connecting with Gaz and all 40 boys. He popped lethal, critical 5+. In all, he said he ended up killing 2 Norns, and then the Maliceptor on the wall was an absolute. And he said and he thinks the Tyrannophexes, or at least were like gravely wounded, and he absolutely wrecked it on his wall turn, killing at least 4 of those monsters, 2 of them being Norn emissaries, and put them on the back foot. So he wasn't scoring in the middle. And then he also realized that towards the end of the game, like I always tell you guys, when you're playing the Ritual, don't worry as an Ork player about making a bunch of objectives on your side of the table. You make one so that you don't fall behind early on the objectives. But in reality, you must try to take their objectives. The whole time in your game, you're just thinking about how am I going to turn off their objectives or go take them on their side of the field. In this case, he said his Storm Boys were able to do it. And that was pretty much putting them in the game, because he said that's what I was worried about with between my enhancements and the boys. So so he did intentionally stop making the objective side of the field. Let's see. He said yeah, that he pretty much couldn't claw back. Norns also don't have that great of output. They're really more about durability. So he said shout out to his teammate that he really appreciates. And he says, yeah, he thinks that I think he plays into War Horde. He'll probably feed the Norns one by one instead. Yeah, okay, exactly. Because he said he realized such a Herculean, I can enunciate words, effort to kill just one. Absolutely. If that, he pretty much committed too much. He's saying his teammate committed too much by not respecting the wall and realizing the wall is only happening once, and that he's very unlikely to kill the Norn outside of the wall. Therefore, putting one, realizing that he can entice one wall and then putting the other 2 back on there would murk. So yeah. That being said, and Anthony's saying the enemy was like, why'd I do that? You know, sometimes tournaments we make those. Like, I'll be playing games and I'm like, bro, I'm so good at screening. No one ever gets in my backfield. Like, I'm on my P's and Q's and on my practice games. And then like round 2 into an event, I don't screen my backfield to get behind me. And someone's like, did someone get behind you, bro? I played you like 25 times and I never once got a deep strike off where I wanted. And you let that happen. So yeah, it happens to all of us. So Kenneth, homie, it happens, bro. I'm with you on that. And shout out to Jeff for that one. Whoa! Crushing the Tyranids. Absolutely love when Ork players crush Tyranids, by the way. Only thing better is probably Necrons. Crushing Necrons always feels fantastic. So now we get into a fun one. So we go, well, I guess they're all fun, but an extra fun one, extra spicy. So we have the Dark Angels. This is Mission Q, supply drop, rapid escalation, sweeping engagement. And again, this one was layout 3. So this is layout 3 because now we're on day 2. So let me read off this Dark Angels list for you real quick. It was Azrael, Lionel Johnson, and this was Gladius Task Force, by the way. Sorry. He said Azrael, Lionel Johnson, Captain in Gravis armor with Artificer armor, Lieutenant, 5 Intercessors, some Blade Guard veterans, the Deathwing Knights, 5-man unit, infiltrators, scouts, a big brick of stern guard, 2 invaders ATV, 2 lancers, and a whirlwind. I was like, I feel like I'm missing something here. I have to make sure I'm not missing any more in Deathwing Knights. Nope. All right, so very thin amount of units on those, but he said going into his round 4, this is kind of what he feared worst on this layout, which was sweeping engagement and supply drops, right? So supply drops, it's like, ooh, you know, you never know what this is going to go like when objectives start disappearing. So he goes, anything can go wrong here. It's just a totally open board. Nowhere really to hide the wagon. So, of course, the Lancers, because they're popping them early. And, of course, we know that's already a bad, really bad thing, like Jeff was saying, because as soon as you get out of position, one of those boys units, and they don't really get good charges off on their turns, and they're really out of place, the enemy doesn't have to commit to them. And then, you know, all of your game plans kind of falling out the window. So he said he's a little sad going into this, but he's played a lot of Dark Angels himself. He said he was best Dark Angels in faction last ITC. That's hilarious, like coincidence. So he's familiar with the list, but he knows that line is a huge problem. So he said, let's see. So we were talking about that, and then he said the fight. He's trying to get the war boss into charges wherever he wants them because they're so important. But he doesn't want to get wrapped with garbage, and he doesn't want to get heroic on. He also said that the enemy here takes fixed, where he took established locust and assassination. Really, really unusual, right? Most people would say I would never even consider taking fixed, and my opponent hardly ever does. I mean, if it's really, really thrown at you, maybe. For example, I've taken Bring It Down because I'm playing Baby Night Spam. So I took the Bring It Down, and the mission was Purge the Foe as well. So I was like, if I have to commit to killing all these knights, then I might as well be getting paid for it. You know what I'm saying? And I was also playing like a Dread Mob list, but very, very circumstantial. In this case, the Dark Angel player, he said, was because he felt like the Dark Angel was experienced with the matchup, and he knew he was going to have to use his characters to win the game. So as in the Dark Angels knew that the Orc players going to have to use his characters to win the game, and because it's supply drop, he knows that he's really just trying to get as much secondary points as he can, because this mission is so random that just assuring points is a huge deal. Like I said, a big thing here was that the Deathwing Knights were not on the table, which we always talk about as Orc players. And if the enemy doesn't put enough stuff on the table and you think they can't really crack your army back hard enough, that's already considered time for WAAAGH sometimes for board positioning. So he said the rest of the army is deployed nearly on the line. Once again, I'm really happy that I have tank busters because he hit his lancers, right? So like we talked about before, not necessarily that they're getting popped automatically. It's just that the enemy can't take the risk on it, because in their head they need the lancers to get the respect out of your battle wagon. So it works in that case, and that's a huge deal. That's something that we did not have before. So when our players are looking so down as to like where we're at because we got double nerfed, or for example, or whatever, I think we just haven't even had a moment to appreciate the WAAAGH changes and the couple of Orc data sheets that we have now. So it's a big deal. So he says the enemy end goes first, and he pushes the line right onto the center objective, starts the established locust. So the enemy's already trying to kick it off. He's like, you can't do nothing about this. I want to kill you. I want your characters to come out. And then it kills many of your characters as I can, so I score as much secondary I have. I deploy locust. No matter where these objectives go, even if I'm losing on primary, I can get it at the end of the game and just enough. And I've killed you early, so you can't make a comeback. Boom. I understand why he did it. But he said that it was very smart as well, because how he has lone op, he's really smart, and he sits at the edge of the objective, and he pushes up on one flank towards his enemy's natural expansion, and he has a kind of weak side on his natural. So pretty much he said the enemy was committing somewhat towards Jeff's objective, natural expansion objective. So he said, so on his turn, he said, seeing the interesting position where he sits. He said he actually had to think about it for almost 5 literal minutes. And then he says, this is where I realize if I push up with my battle wagons and I hope to survive, I then charge him, it's really unlikely that I have very many boys left, because he has a 10-man unit of stern guard brick led by Azrael and 2 lancers. So they're absolutely going to pop the wagons. Absolutely. Because those pretty much dev wounds from the from the stern guard, so he's going to auto pop that thing almost with rerolling wounds on it, and then he can probably pop the other wagon if it's too exposed with the double lancers. I mean, one lancer might not, but it even could on its own. So he said, he said, so with all that being said, he said a key factor for him was that that he realized that if he went after him turn one, the Deathwing Knights would not be on the board, and they'd have to just make a natural 9-inch charge. And that's where he decided to make a turn one. Whoa! Yes, he actually did. He did a turn one WAAAGH, guys. That's crazy, right? To make that decision in such a hard, skewed up matchup, where you're like, dang, if I go forward like my typical game plan, like we talked about, where the benefit of this list, where you have a kind of linear game plan, he goes, this was just that mission that I really didn't want to go into an army that could pop my wagons. This was just that one, as well as just the fact that stuff starts disappearing. So where my boys are sometimes might just suck. So this is the army where can one pop his wagons, crush the boys, and then the lion himself can punch through like 10 dudes. It's silly. So he called the WAAAGH, and he said he moved gas forward. He moved the center of boys forward. He said his advances were quite low to make it into the combats. He said his tank busters shot into the lion, barely did any damage. It was only about 3. He said his boys' units on the far left side rolled in advance and did not make it into the combat. Fortunately, his Grouts made a 6 and was able to out-see him on that objective. So just getting the Grouts right up the field, boys, and just touching it, that saved them from at least stopping the primary flip right there early. Like putting up on points right there. So he said really his only charge that he got off was Gaz in hope that he survives the lion punching Gaz first. That's really what had happened. So pretty much the lion only takes guys down to 2 wounds here, 3 wounds only. So he kills the bodyguards and he kills Makari, takes guys down to 2 wounds. So now Gaz has lost his buffs personally. He's also lost the Makari buffs, like we said, were a big deal for the boys. And then he said the lion pops AOC. At the end of the day, the lion lives on 3 wounds. The reason why he probably popped this, if you're wondering too, is because like we just talked about, volume is king, right? So the appeal of Gaz's sweep is appealing into, possibly 2 here. So he's just like, well, he has a 4-up invuln, 2-up armor save. Your normal crushing is 2 AP. It takes away the fact that you can even sweep me. So he said, fortunately, he's getting 0 on primary, which happens to him for the next multiple turns. He takes out his stern guard, he takes out his lancers, picks up Gaz and gives a good amount of boys. On his weak side, he charges. On his weak side, he charges his blade guard and ATV, and ends up being a big mistake because they get blended by the boys, as you guys know. If just volume is king here again, those blade guard they just don't have it because they're such low toughness. And so he starts to lose that flank. He brings the Deathwing Knights down onto his natural expansion and tries to deploy a Homer. He said for him, he thinks it's a good move because he thinks it's a flank that he can win, as in the Dark Angel player thinks it is. But it ends up being a mistake because it ends up being the furthest objective from the last supply drop. So that's not good. So once he does that, he ends up giving up that natural expansion completely and letting the Deathwing Knights just sit there and not be able to get supply drop expansion by the end of the game. From there, the Stone Guard are getting hit by this -1 to wound, of course, because that's fantastic. And he ends up with very little in the middle, losing his own natural, but he has his he has Jeff's natural expansion, so it's a draw. Everything on my side of the board, and I migrate over to supply drop and leave his Deathwing Knights alone to get long charges. And it turns out the game gets to be where it's supposed to be. But he said it wasn't going great for him to begin with, but he said luckily it's turning out later in the game. And then he turned it around. He said, I don't know if I would have been able to make this same strategic play again, walling turn 1, but it was obviously ended up working out. I could have probably positioned better and gotten a unit up to the middle. Let's see. He said, of course, the Storm Boys being in deep strike was a big deal. And he just thinks that it was he was happy to just get the win. So I get it. Sorry, I was looking over those notes a bit because that was probably one of them where he had the most extensive notes, and I think he was the closest to losing. He also had the most key kind of decision making there, in my opinion. Being able to call Juan, that's a very risky and like bold move to understand that really this is my one shot. You've committed the lion into early and really nothing else, but I got this is where my durability is going to lie. And I'm going to have to control here and stop your primary. And I thought that was a great move. So something that we can all learn from that. So shout out to you, Git, pulling that win out. So then we go into game 5, which was Mission K, Scorched Earth, Stalwart, Search and Destroy. So this was into the Sisters of Battle with the Hallowed Martyrs. So we have Junith, Demon Ferg, or I don't know that chick's name, my bad. Morgan, Val, Canis, a Jump Pack, Nilogist, Minister and Priest, and then Palatine. So we have a Sisters of Battle squad, 3 10-man units of Arcoflagellants, a unit of 10 Celestines, Sacrosaints, sorry, a 5-man unit of Seraphim, a Paragon War School squad, Immolators, Sororis Rhino, and then Arbinger. So really what ended up here, just to simplify, even though he said this is a very respectable player and that he's familiar with it, obviously they're at round 5. Both these guys are undefeated at this point. He said that he just had the tools to really put enough damage into it. I'm not going to go too deep into this one because it just seemed like that he said it was definitely an extremely scary because the Arcoflagellants with their amount of output, and he said they can actually shred him if he gets the initiative on him. He said so he thinks it's a pretty matchup into his initial game plan, but he was extremely patient with the boys. He said, let's see. There was a big point where he said he also used his Seraphim to completely wrap up without touching a battle wagon, so he couldn't get the 20 boys out. With pre-measuring, you would take space to get the boys out by trapping me inside my wagon while he tried to stage up. So that's pretty rough. He said, this is the one game where I called the wall while not being able to get those 20 boys out. So he sat there for a couple of minutes and realized that if he waited longer, I would have continued to chip away with his shooting. So he said in reality, the second boys came out and ended up clearing things up for the second at the end of the game. It was a respectable army, and he does feel like the Sisters actually might have actually had a little bit of the advantage here because they have just enough like combined arms killing power. But he said, but all in all, Brandon had a critical moment despite being down 20 points where he stuck the boys in the wagon. And that was enough to keep the scoring close, but it was still ended up staying in his favor. Let's see. I think there was another thing here that I wanted to mention. He said, here it was. He said, I did one big, huge mistake. And he ended up getting heroic off into gas, and then he forced all his attacks into that one character. Like we talk about using heroics for defensive measures, right? So he lost out on Gaz's attacks, but lucky he said the 20-man unit kind of pulled that out. So I wanted to make that little shout out as well, because obviously it was a very respectable player with the Sisters of Battle, getting that far when people really consider Sisters of Battle not to be that imposing. So then we move on to his last game, where it was Mission J, Linchpin, Raise Banner, Search and Destroy. Let's go. And this is into the Smurf Marines, where, of course, like he said, when we was considering Orks and War Horde itself, that he was going to have to play into possibly Space Marines. Let's see. So I have the picture up on screen. He has a couple things where he said he was wondering if he was going to end up going into his friend the guard player or this Necrons list with 30 Lich Guard. He said he really wasn't sure about the Necron matchup, but he felt pretty decent about the other ones. And he wasn't really sure about the Grey Knight one. Yeah, because they're going to kind of keep moving on you and pick you apart, but they don't really pop wagons, but that's a good call, right? Only can against Immortal Wounds. So he says he thinks that him getting into Space Marines Gladius was actually to his benefit because he plays Space Marines and he's very familiar with Space Marines and this sort of list. And he said he played them in other team events. He said he wants to shout out the opponent because they had a blast game, even though they were so late into the event. and that he was like buying drinks and stuff. So that's pretty awesome. He said in this game, the tank busters once again were a huge factor because they got the respect out of the lancers, so they couldn't really pop off on the wagons as effectively as they would want to. And he said he kind of deployed them a little too far back in one case. He said he had the units of bolt inceptors that would wreck him. So he needed to be aggressive and do damage before they came down. Yeah, or they would just walk in and do a bunch of damage all the time. He said, again, this game, I started with one battle wagon empty, so I could raise banners. So he could pretty much activate on his home objectives with Sticky. He said that he staged up in the middle as typical, but then a unit of Calgar's unit and his squad advanced up to charge the wagon. And as I said before, he made it sure that his gas could heroic if needed. Kyle ended up going aggressively for his natural expansions, and he goes for the other one. So both these guys are going for the natural with a lot of their units, not really too early committing into each other. They said after trading units, so these are flash kits and such, he ends up having to split Galgar and Gilliman away from each other. That's another thing where Space Marines, when you start losing their assets and they're playing Hero Hammer out here, Calgar and Gilliman are running around as heroes, literally. He said the tank buses ended up having their one all-star moment of actually killing something. Yes, it took all the way to the end of the event, and they popped off, and using the pulsar rocket, they actually killed Gilliman, and he doesn't stand back up. Whoa, let's go, you get. So we always talk about ignoring the fight, the shooting phase, the DACA phase or something. He ended up pulling out a pop-in, the popping Gilliman combo. He has the monster keyword, so I mean he's getting tank busted. I absolutely love that. But the fact that he didn't give up was huge. He said he ended up putting gas in the middle with 20 boys into Calgar's unit and then killed everything besides Calgar. He killed a lot of boys, but he didn't kill Gaz. The other 20-man unit ended up picking up his inceptors. He ends up picking up a ton of he ends up picking up inceptors. -1 to wound ends up helping him to keep holding the point. Then he says, and then I think it looks like pretty much you're just starting to run out of assets at this point. He said I think there was just a typo here, to be honest. He said that the lieutenant and the blade guard unit come up, but they weren't actually able enough to shift the battlefield. And I guess between the wagon and whatever was left, was able to kind of shift them and keep his objective. And he ended up winning the game, raising 4 banners by the end of the game. I think one thing players should remember is raising banners isn't like an action. As long as your battle line unit is on the objective and you control it, boom, you raise the banner. That's it. Boom, you got another point. So he said he got all of those. And shout out to his teammates and shout out to Tony and Kyle who came to the event, and the second place finisher who was his friend Brandon, that he said, hey, it would have been a good game. And nonetheless, they both got golden tickets. And shout out to the event organizer out here at Wet Coast. It was a great time. He said but he enjoyed being featured, and thanks for the notes, dude. That was really cool of you. And of course, I remember you because almost like a year ago, this channel's not even 2 years old. Jeff Jew did great back then, and he was one of the people I covered. I remembered, and he said that he enjoyed getting another golden ticket and being on the list. So thank you to you. Very humbling to see that you like the channel and that you're a fan. And of course, we're a fan of you. So shout out to you and your excellent War Horde list with the Gazgul Traka, 2 Pain Boys, 2 War Bosses, 2 20-man unit boys, 2 trucks with SWAT teams, Flash Kits and Tank Busters, 1 unit of Storm Boys, always in reserve, only 2 Meganauts with Twin Kill Saws, and then 2 units of 10 Grots, and 2 battle wagons. Whoa! To the rise of the War Horde, baby, winning that event. Everybody was down on us and questioning where we would be, and here we are, Gits. But of course, don't forget about our other detachments because there's still a lot of meat left on that bone. And so we move on to another Git who picked the bone at the Wet Coast. Is Mr. Noah Bedham, the spear tip of the Green Tide, the biggest wave in the mass of boy bodies. We have our boy Noah. So Noah ended up taking a new variation where he said it's group swim with the party bus. Now, let's see, you guys have got anything to say here. Shout out to the chat. You guys are interacting. That's what's up. And shout out to our get Andrew Stone for 10 gifted WAAAGH Tactic memberships. Whoa, let's go, Andrew. Super supportive every week, you crazy get. That's a big deal. We actually do have a video out with Noah in the membership, the tier 1 membership. But you can actually watch him talking about his archetype of the group swim and where he really breaks it down even more and further than we do in the videos that we will now. But you'll get a little taste here, as well as if you want to be in the paint and fix my list, you're a tier 1 member. So thank you to Andrew for that, as you hooked up some gets with that, and hopefully you guys try out for fix my list. And of course, Andrew, you'd be first if you need that. Now, let's get into our homie Noah Bedham, where he has just typical group swim archetype: 2 pain boys, 2 war bosses, and a weird boy. He has ferocious throw off and brutal but cunning. He has 4 20-man units of boys. Yes, you're bringing the rocket launchers. Don't forget the rocket launchers. They're actually important and they do matter. And then 1 10-man unit of boys, which absolutely does matter as well. A truck, 1 battle wagon with all the fixins: death roller, hard case cannon, grabbing claw, lava, boom. A 5-man units of flash kits, a Gretchen unit, simply 1. Commandos, followed by 2 5-man units of Storm Boys, and then 2 tank busters. And then gets did bring the Smash Hammer. And of course, I got to the chats at the end of this. We'll talk about it. Don't worry, kids. So the real difference here is typically in Noah's list, he would bring more boys and not the wagon. He said he's been feeling like he needs the wagon. A little bit of a safety, controlling attrition, better staging, reducing the profile, increasing some speed. There's a couple of reasons here. We didn't get to talk truly yet fully as how he feels about the change, but nonetheless, he did excellent, going 5-1 at this event anyways. And let's take a look at his path. Now, some people right off the bat, I know you're thinking, oh, but he lost his first game. Mind you, this guy's already someone who's gone 6 round and 1. He's already golden ticket, world-class qualified. So he just said, hey, to be honest, first game, he had a couple things on his mind, ended up just taking a little too long than he thought, ran out of time, ended up losing. That happens, but we'll take a look at the list. He said the player is absolutely good too. You know, playing against Tau is a lot of time management too. They throw a lot of dicey, a lot of saves. Even if you're a little off a little bit right there in your execution, it can pay out. It can play out. And I think if anything, that was humbling from the tellus and kind of bring us as perspective, because something I see in the comments too when I talk about Green Tide is like, man, I was playing, I timed out turn 3. Like, yeah, dude, it's a commitment to figure out Tide, right? But it's also a simplicity to figure out simple math in Tau. So we have Commander, in Enforcer Battle Suit, Ethereal, Strike Force, I say Strike Force, Strike Team, Strike Force, Broadside Battle Suit, Crisis, Knife Fight Battle Suits, Ghost Keel, Hammerhead, Crew Rampagers, 3 Recruit Rampagers, 2 Riptides, and then Stealth, followed by more Stealth Suits, and then more Stealth Suits, and then 2 Vespids. So here I believe I'm familiar, like I said, with the mission. So the first mission here was Terraform. Let me go back to it. And man, dude, this was layout 8. So let me get to that real quick. This was Terraform, Stalwart, Crucible of Battle on layout 8. Something here I personally played. You know, Tau, and then onto this layout, and had the issue where it's like, well, they can put these stealth suits in perfect positions. If they deploy first, you don't get your commandos off. They can end up getting a little too far back. So if they win the deployment face off, you can end up being like, you don't know if I like where I can place these commandos necessarily. That can be a factor. As well as just the amount of shots they can end up getting. Now, these guys don't have breachers on his list. Breachers would be a really, really devastating into boys when they stand on objectives. Mind you, don't always have to stand on them, because you can lose a couple guys, stay off the objectives, and regrow back onto it. But it's something to bring in mind when you're practicing with it. So Tau does have the volume, and they do have the board presence with this layout, because they can simply line up the buildings. And then when you come up to the middle, you're kind of funneled so they can focus fire you down as much as they can. But by no means was this a one-sided game. It wasn't like he was getting annihilated. He just kind of eventually ran out of time, still getting a 68-point win there with the Terraform and layout 8. So let's go into his second game, where he goes into the Space Wolves, Champions of Russ, which typically you'd be like, oh, is this like their version of War Horde? This could be problematic. I mean, as you can see right now, if you're looking on the screen, you have Beyond the Fell-Handed right there at the beginning. So let's take a look at the list. And let me see what the mission was. So mission A, take and hold, raise banners, tipping point, layout 8. So we have Beyond the Fell-Handed, Ragnar Blackmane. I'm just making this out with the accent, guys. Sorry, entertain me. Captain with Jump Pack and Judiciar, Tech Marine. 5 intercessors, 10-man assault jump pack intercessors. 2 6-man unit of Blade Guard, infiltrators, some scouts, Ballistus Dread, Redemptor Dread, Repulsor, and then 2 units of impulses. These guys want to play like War Horde, to be honest. This would be a tough matchup for most people. It looks like he got a big 90-point win here. Take and hold. Maybe the Space Wolf player was a little bit too committal, trying to hold too many objectives and not really playing the trading game early enough to like get off like a devastating blow and cleanly picking up one of those 20-man units of boys. But just knowing how our boy Noah plays this Green Tideless is he's willing to give you one of the leaderless units. And then if you play too far back, he's going to jump onto you and kind of box you out with that unit as well. And then the units that actually have leaders are going to be the ones that are really taking advantage of the wall, devastating you. He can also decide to use his 5-man units of SWAT teams to kind of play a skirmish game with you. And then in this case, he can really put the battle wagon up and not necessarily respect your firepower enough to pop a wagon like Repulsor could, and 2 Dreadnoughts could, but it would require the combined might of all 3 of them onto your wagon. So if you can kind of mitigate it to one of them, there's a chance that your wagon actually just kind of survives it. So that means you can have good staging presence. And then when you get off on the wall, now mind you, if you just wrap and trap these impulsors, which is what I'm kind of actually assuming happened here from Noah, where you don't have to really kill the stuff inside. You just touch it with your and your strength 4, and you're not really popping that vehicle. Maybe you charge his for example, maybe you charged his scout units and his infiltrators, and you swung around and tagged this impulsor and surrounded it with the rest of your boy units while your war boss and your knob or just your knob itself picked up the scouts with a couple boy support. But now none of these elite breaks of dudes are getting out, and you're just kind of winning the game. I know it sounds like a simplicity of the like simplifying how this could have gone, but looking at the score and what the mission probably was, I'm kind of assuming that happened. I can just see, personal experience, it does kind of catch Space Marine players off guard if that happened. If it didn't, though, hey, it's still something to consider. And we move on to game 3. So game 3 was against Chaos Knights. Let me look into what mission this was, by the way. I have it right here. Chaos Knights, baby. Everybody asked about this too. We got Mission N, The Ritual, Swift Action, Crucible of Battle. Okay. So we have Chaos Knights. We have Stalker, 4 Brigands, 2 Executioners, 2 Huntsmen, 2 Carnivores, 2 Beasts of Nurgle, and then 2 units of Nurglings. For this one, like I always say, if you're an Ork player, make one near you early game, so that you can kind of retain some of your primary and not fall behind. But in reality, it's about getting up the field, taking their objectives that they each want to create and spawn, and then just dogging them down and charging up and beating them up. In this case, you can't always like kill all the war dogs, but on that go turn, you do need to kill at least a couple. And then you are appreciative that you have your tank busters. So like we talk about the tank busters, you can't reliably destroy things like you would if you had the shock attack guns. So this is going to mean both your tank busters are likely to be used to kill one of their vehicle, their brigands, or their which one is the one I would normally go for? The carnivore. I typically go for the carnivore because if he gets off, he gets sustained, and you're playing Green Tide, so you can't really allow him to really be there. And if the brigand's in combat with you, it's typically because he's trying to fight for the objective, and you can kind of erode him over time with re-rolling wounds. But the carnivore just kind of gets off too much on you. So you can take it as tank busters, get off on carnivores, you call the wall, get off a couple more. If you have to, you go for the brigand. and because you can't reach him, but that's why having guns matters. Having commandos also allow you to take up that staging in the on layout 8, where you can kind of play one of those terrains on the edges of the table. So I like that as well. It does stop the Nurglings too, because you have so many Nurglings that he could try to block out your battle wagons. So of course, Noah's just a gangster, familiar war boss. So 92-point win there. And then we move on. So now in this fourth game, we're on day 2. Where he goes into mission Q, supply drop, rapid escalation, sweeping engagement, and now we're on layout 3. Ooh, and he's going into the Astra Militarum. Okay. That's respectable, because typically I think he not the best, necessarily the best hiding positions. From what I've seen here, let's see. Yeah. Okay. So let's look at this list real quick. We have Gaunt's Ghost, Rogodan Commander, Ursula, Cadian Shock, 5 units Cadian Shock, and then 2 units of Catachans. Yeah, right. 1, 2, 3, 4. And it's 4 units of Cadian Shock, and then 2 units of Catachans. Yeah, I lied. 3 units of artillery teams. Cool, with mortars. Bulgren Squad. So there's probably with Ursula, nice little mortar pit. Bulgren Squad, big 6-man unit. A unit of Lehman Russ Exterminators, 2 Rogel Dorns. Ooh, this is so thin on vehicles. I have a good idea. So the mortars crew is respectable enough to pick up your scoring units, which would be annoying. So you would have to kind of accept, like, I'm going to sticky my home objective. But that's where you actually have the weird boy to jump. So it's like, hey, I'll do it. Sticky my home objective. Definitely use my commandos to try to not let the Catachans push me all the way back. And then you can decide to commit your non-leader boy units come out early. Of course, you can still blood surge if they shoot into you, so they can't even really get that close to you within the infantry to move block you. And then you can end up using the blood surge to be a little bit more safe, regrowing into safe locations closer to the enemy, picking up these a couple 10-man units of battle line that he has, and then calling your true wall, because in order to actually keep the objective, he's going to have to kind of commit some vehicles forward. You don't even really have to kill them. You just have to out OC them and tag them all up. And because he's really just committing to, I have artillery to kill your stuff, and then tanks and just enough stuff to hold you back, not enough shooting platforms and volume of fire, he's going to have to commit multiple vehicles to pick up unit of boys. And then in that case, your other units of boys can get off on him. He still has tank busters. So your tank busters might get off early and kill some of the smaller units, like the Lehman Russ Exterminator, or maybe you decide to kind of try to weaken the Bulgren Squad if that's the only thing that's getting given to you, because they're like the only thing that can hold the line into your boys and maybe chew them up a little bit. So he has a very linear game plan, but Noah, I'm sure, has tried to deal with it before. Still respectable, because it's still guard and they can still erode you. So 76-point win, not that easy, and easier said than done. But the Green Tide definitely has answers for kind of those lower activation lists. So 76-point win there. And then we go into his 5th game, which it was Aldadi, and this was the War Host. War Host. So Azrael, Genzar, Lilacs, Altark, Uhtred, and some Dire Avengers, some Fire Dragons. Of course, you'd be an Eldar player right in your list like that, dude. I'm about to not read your list. No, I'm just kidding. Howling Banshees, Striking Scorpions, Warp Spider, Guardian, 2 Shroud Runners, a Wing Rider, some Falcons, Wave Serpent, Shining, 2 War Walkers. Goodness. So Noah specifically said that he thinks that his Green Tide list works really well into those units. They typically want to use their shenanigans to kind of get back onto objectives, and they're trying to finesse your shooting and such. In this case, you're like, I'm just meat. You have to come kill me. You're not going to kill me fast enough. If I'm even somewhat still alive, I'm going to murder you. Easier said than done, of course, because they can still manipulate secondaries and have good potential to score themselves. They do have just enough to still try to flip object. Oops, that's my Ork. I'm an Ork. Sorry. To try to fight with you and flip some of this. Just with like proper movement shenanigans, but And of course, Wind Riders actually have nasty output that they have to actually be respected by your Ork boys. So they're not just picking them up by any means, but Noah's been saying for the most part that he thinks he has an advantage of this. What was his run turn 5 by? I had to see what the mission was. Sorry, actually. Should have called that out already. Yeah. So this was mission 5. Let me sure. Mission 5 was mission K. Scorched Earth, round 5, sorry. Round 5 was Scorched Earth, Stalwart, and then Search and Destroy. Okay, so being kind of hemmed in deployment-wise would definitely suck. I was like, something's going on with that score. That definitely suck for your Green Tide list. You're kind of boxed into your deployment zone. You just got your Mandos, hopefully. And then they can kind of run the field with their speed and kind of take control and positioning. So I respect that. Yeah. And then of course Scorched Earth, right? Everybody can kind of score somewhat well. Not ideally, right? But you know what's kind of happening there. I'm wondering who went second in this matchup. So great job, Noah, by that one. My favorite get. And then we go on to his last game, which was Mission J, Linchpin, raise banners, and then search and destroy again. Mind you, these are both layout 3. Should have said that. Both the last 2 games are layout 3. So for his last game, he has Blood Angels, Commander Dante, Lieutenant with combi weapon, 2 and 3 impulsors, 2 5-man units of assault jump packs, 3 ballistas dreadnoughts, 2 big bricks of blade guard veterans, and 2 units of incursors, followed by outriders, and then a big brick of Sangard, and then 2 scout squads. Very interesting here. Now, like I'm inclined to believe as well, Noah probably somewhat mitigated his ability to get out of transports. I think people a lot of the time overlook that when they're playing against Tide. They think that they're safe from just simply getting charged, but not getting tagged and wrapped anyways. Realizing that I don't really care to kill your transports. I just let my boys get off on you and charge into you. If you shoot me, I will just, kind of scurry and blood surge behind terrain a little bit better and then regrow using the strat and the pain boy if you did focus on that unit, if I think I need to get somewhere and kill something punchy. So if I have to get off on this blade guard veteran squad, I might charge them with my on the wall with my important unit, but then wrap something else if I have to. So I think that's just going to be always a big factor here when you're playing with the Green Tide, is to understand that you do have a little bit of skirmishing here for the scouts, and the wagon itself being introduced means you can stage also somewhat aggressively and then disembark those gets maybe that don't have a character. That way they can get involved early and get a little bit more movement, even though they don't got a WAAAGH. Yet at the same time, maybe it might be that you're using it to keep your most valuable pain boy / war boss unit safe, getting as close as possible to your enemy's natural expansive, and then declaring the WAAAGH, getting those guys out, overflowing it, and then not allowing them to ever really get any more easy primary. So and even though Blood Angels definitely have the output to really take it out, it just comes down to the execution of actually getting enough assets into multiple units of boys and then straight out killing them, or are you just killing the boys units and a little bit of assets that the Noah wants to give you, and then he claps you back, picks up your assets, and then you don't have enough, and then he continues kind of eroding you over time. And that's kind of how I think that goes with that Blood Angel list matchup. So shout out to Noah and his Green Tide for making another stellar run right there as well. I know, when someone's caliber of Noah, no one wants to lose round 1 especially, but still a great job in representing the Green Tide itself. Anything can happen. So let's look at his list: 2 pain boys, 2 war bosses, and the weird boys, 4 20-man units of boys, a 10-man unit of boys, a truck for the SWAT teams, a wagon with all the fixins, the 5-man unit of flash kits for that SWAT team, 1 simply baby Grai unit, the Mandos leading the way as usual, 2 5-man units, the Storm Boys, and then 2 tank busters to really draw out the respect of the enemies. DACA, right? You're playing with that wagon, like it seems to be implied for both players we covered at this West Coast event, that tank busters just being on the list directly impacts your enemy psychologically, positioning, staging, lanes they control, and their ability to threaten your staging units, such as your wagon. So big deal, just in the off the top of your head, with tank busters being there. So you don't always have to bring the shock attack gun. I think a lot of people get too character heavy on Ork lists, and I really love that Noah continues to just keep about 5 characters on his Tide list. That should never be overlooked. So of course, shout out to Noah Bedham and his Green Tide. Whoa. Yeah, let's go. So with that being said, I think a War Horde wins big. War Horde's right back on top, but there's still so much meat left on the bone, so much left to explore less than the Ork Codex. I think the Adaka players, people who like to shoot and be cunning, are still kind of figuring things out. If Yanari ends up taking a nerf, as it should, will that make the Taktikal Brigade more appealing? I think 20-man units of boys have even worked in that detachment, not as well because of gas, but the amount of shooting and other type of support you get in Taktikal Brigade makes it so it's not a straight up default into War Horde. And I like that there's contention here. With that being said, I think Ork players should just play really what they want to at this time and explore the detachments that interest them most. This is just a crazy good time to be an Ork player. Because the amount of detachment selections we have with the depths of our codex means that we can actually get really creative. And speaking about creative, we got our get red ones goes faster with them boys of bricks. Let's go, you get. And shout out to 6K subscribers on you and your all your work you get. So great job on that. And yes, sir, units of boys are fantastic. But of course, as you guys should know, creativity is the way of the WAAAGH. And so really you become your own meta, really become proficient. Check out our videos as to how to really become better with certain Ork detachments or units, some strategy guides, whatever it may be. We're here to help out. If you leave a comment, like, subscribe. If we didn't do good, leave a thumbs down. Let us know how we can improve. And of course, check out our paint competition stream that's coming up. I know it's not the most meta, but it's definitely the most fun. So of course, thank you all to all you gets. And there's only one thing to keep in mind is don't cross our wall because we'll knock your teeth out. Whoa.